The impeachment trial forced some senators running for president to stay in Washington this week, but others, like Andrew Yang and Joe Biden, were campaigning in Iowa today. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe caught up with Biden after an event in Mason City, Iowa earlier.
Just when you thought the feud between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders was over, well, they're at it again. Remember, earlier this week, Bernie Sanders apologized to Biden after one of his supporters wrote an op-ed that called him corrupt. Yesterday, Biden said he accepted the apology. But then last night, both campaigns fired off videos, call them campaign ads, call them social media content, whatever it is, that accuse each other of going dirty, in the case of Biden, towards Sanders. And then Sanders turned around and said, wait a second, you want to play dirty? Let's remind people that back in the 90s when you were a senator, Joe Biden, you once talked openly about cutting federal benefits, including Social Security. Social Security, of course, a big issue of concern for Democratic voters, to seniors who make up a big part of the Iowa voting population especially. So today, Joe Biden goes to an event in Mason City, Iowa, and afterward we asked him, why, after accepting Sanders' apology, did you decide to go after Sanders again? Take a look. You said you accepted Bernie's apology and now you're attacking him. Why are you doing that?
Go.
Why wasn't his apology enough, Mr. Vice President?
Right this way, sir.
Why attack Sanders?
Why? You're getting nervous, man. Calm down. It's okay. He apologized for saying that I was corrupt. He didn't say anything about whether or not I was telling the truth about Social Security.
Remember, Sanders and Biden sit atop polling here in Iowa and across the country. So this knife fight, if you want to call it that, is sure to continue in the coming days. Tanya?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much. Let's bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. Hi, Caitlin. Boy, that was an interesting response from Joe Biden there
Ed
to Ed's
O'Keefe,
question.
right in the middle of it with those good questions,
I was
as
worried about him
always.
for a second there. Why do you think, though, this feud seems to keep refiring when it looks like it was put to bed?
Well, it's really interesting because you would think that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are such different candidates. They have little in common, perhaps, besides their age. But in our CBS News Battleground Tracker poll, we have found overlap support for these two. About half of Biden supporters say they'd also consider Sanders, and about half of Sanders supporters say they'd also consider Biden. So they're really aiming for similar types of voters, especially working class voters in the Midwest, Iowa, and those older voters. What's a critical issue for older voters? Social Security, as Ed mentioned. So this is something that the Sanders campaign has really been angling for over the past few weeks, especially. Remember last week when we saw that feud escalate between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, it was really Joe Biden that Bernie Sanders wanted to go after. He was ready to go after him on the Iraq War and on other issues.
Right.
So this is something that the Sanders camp certainly wants to have. Joe Biden, meanwhile, has been releasing those social media ads, responding to this fight. You could see him getting a little agitated there as well. This is something that he believes he can draw a contrast with Sanders on, even though there are some questions about what he meant on Social Security.
So it's very interesting. So when Sanders goes after Biden on Social Security, that's really where he's going to get a reaction, because that goes to his core constituency.
Right. When you look at voters over the age of 65, that's a group that Joe Biden does very well with. And he was trying to say that Sanders' campaign distorted some of his record on this.
So, of course, then Biden responds by going after Sanders' record on guns, which is something Hillary Clinton also did back in 2016. Right. What is that record, and is this a legitimate criticism?
Yes. So Joe Biden criticized Bernie Sanders for voting against the Brady gun bill, which included background checks. He also went after him for supporting a loophole for manufacturers. Now, this is something that Bernie Sanders was criticized a lot for in 2016, and something that Hillary Clinton tried to draw a contrast with him on. In a meeting with the editorial board of the New York Times recently, Sanders explained his evolution on this topic and said, look, he came from a state of Vermont, a very rural state, a lot of gun owners as constituents, and he has evolved on this issue as the public has evolved on this issue. And he did pledge that he would have a very strict gun policy as president. So this is something where the Biden campaign is trying to drive a wedge for Bernie Sanders, but this is also something that Bernie Sanders has addressed on the campaign trail, not only now, but back in 2016 as well.
And where does he stand on guns now? Is he very much pro-regulation, as is most of the Progressive Party?
Yes, he is supportive of background checks. He has said that he is ready to fight the NRA. This is something, though, that Joe Biden has a lot of credibility on because he did was an architect of the crime bill, which had a ban on assault weapons. So he talks a lot about how he believes he's the only person in this race that has actually taken on the NRA and been successful at it.
And I want to ask you about something that Joe Biden said during a campaign event in Iowa Wednesday. He was asked whether he would be willing to testify in the Senate impeachment trial if he was called to do so. Here's what he said. Let's listen.
The reason why I would not make the deal, the bottom line is, this is a constitutional issue, and we're not going to turn it into a farce, into some kind of political theater. They're trying to turn it into political theater, but I want no part of being any part of that.
So that's a no. But would getting up there and testifying during this trial with, so many eyes on those proceedings, would that help Biden or hurt him?
I think it would certainly be a risk and something that he doesn't want to engage in. And this comes as there had been reports in the Washington Post about this grand bargain of sorts that Republicans could trade John Bolton for testimony for Joe Biden or his son Hunter. This is something that the president has been trying to inject into this. This is something that started this whole impeachment process in the first place. But this is something that the Joe Biden campaign has consistently not wanted to engage in. Instead, Joe Biden says, look, this has nothing to do with me or my son. This is about the president holding up aid in Ukraine. And when you hear from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Adam Schiff, in his interview with Norah O'Donnell, said that the Bidens are not going to be able to say, if they are witnesses, what the president did, that this is not related to this case at hand. Republicans, meanwhile, want to inject the Bidens into this impeachment proceeding and muddy the waters a little bit.
Right. All right. So now I also want to ask you about a Democratic candidate for president, Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's in Washington doing her part during the Senate impeachment trial. She was asked how this is affecting her chances for president, and she basically said, look, I'm here doing my constitutional duty. Is this resonating with her supporters in Iowa who are missing her on the trail?
I've been looking up at the television screens around the newsroom, and I've seen a lot of Amy Klobuchar. So this is something that her campaign is trying to do, which is to get her on TV as much as possible, because she can look like, in their view, that she is, doing her day job. She's in the Senate doing something that she was elected to do, and they believe that could be a way to help break through all of the noise of impeachment. But you contrast that with the candidates in Iowa this week. Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, meeting thousands of Iowans. And if we know anything about Iowans, as we've been talking about, they make those decisions at the last possible minute because they're weighing all these candidates. Having that direct interaction with people can really change hearts and minds. We've seen it happen before, and we can expect to have it again. So while they're trying to make do with what they have, these senators are really wishing they were on the campaign trail, especially because they have to be in the Senate, can't talk to anybody, can only drink water or milk, can't be on their phones, can't really do much. They're there till about 2 in the morning.
Right, and there was some talk earlier, Ed said, about some of these candidates trying to jump on planes and go back and forth. That hasn't been happening, though, right?
Well, they're aiming to get to Iowa this weekend. Their schedules are packed. If they can make it, they will make it. If not, that will certainly be a factor in these final weeks before Iowans start weighing in.
All right, I also want to ask you about the Trump campaign's re-election app that is soon to be unveiled. Is this the first ever of its kind?
Coming to a phone near you, and the campaign released those photos exclusively to CBS this morning. This is something that is really going to be a game changer for campaigns because it's not only a fundraising tool, it's a real sophisticated get out the vote effort and something that campaigns feel like, the Trump campaign feels like it can target voters so directly. And that's what's really going to make or break these campaigns. The Bernie Sanders campaign has a similar tool. And so I think this is something that we'll continue to see. But the Trump campaign
Are other campaigns planning on rolling them out?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. The Bernie Sanders campaign has one up and running. I wouldn't be surprised if this is some kind of tool that the candidates want to use in they're using it in some form, but how sophisticated they can be, how targeted they can be with those voters really would give an advantage.
It's all about the tech.
Exactly.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much.
Thank you.